Imagine waking up tomorrow to the news that fuel costs have just skyrocketed. And I don't mean for a day or by a few cents. I mean a massive, sustained jump across city after city, country after country. It's an event that shakes the entire continent of Europe all at once. So what happens to a highly connected, modern society when the absolute bedrock of its daily movement suddenly becomes too expensive to ignore? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the massive hidden chain reaction of a continent-wide fuel shock. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture yourself pulling up to a gas station. You look at the price at the pump, and it's so incredibly high, you literally just stop and stare in sheer disbelief. Now, look, we've all seen prices rise before, right? We all know the exhaustion of inflation and market volatility, but this scenario is totally different. This is a jump severe enough to make everyday life feel instantly heavy. The real question isn't just about how much it costs to fill your tank. The question is how much more people can take before the rhythm of everyday life starts to fundamentally break down. The exact moment those prices hit, the whole continent kind of just freezes for a second. And then a massive collective recalculation begins. Every single car trip is instantly questioned. Every bus route is suddenly under intense budget pressure. Every truck delivery company frantically recalculates their daily survival. Every taxi driver wonders if starting their engine today will actually lose them money. And farmers, they're looking out at their heavy machinery, doing the math in their heads, and realizing their operations just became drastically more expensive overnight. And that brings us to the core theme of our explainer today. There's a famous saying, gas prices are never just about gas. And it is so true. They're about freedom, they're about movement, work, food, and travel. Fuel is really the hidden underlying cost of keeping our modern civilization running. So when we talk about gas prices, we are actually talking about the price of existing in a modern economy. Fuel is one of those invisible essentials, the kind we only truly notice when it becomes way too expensive. And in this hypothetical scenario, the public mood would shift incredibly fast. It wouldn't just be your standard irritation over inflation. Actually, scratch that. It would turn into genuine fear. The fear of being trapped. People with long commutes suddenly wonder if they can even afford to keep their jobs. Families realize their budgets are suffocating. It's that terrifying realization that you cannot simply opt out of moving. Section 1, the hidden supply skeleton. Now, what's really interesting here is that trucks do not stop hauling goods just because fuel is expensive. Logistics companies, shipping networks, freight systems, they still have to run. But the pressure, it's immediate. Because they can't just stop, they're forced to pass that pressure right on down the line. Public transit systems get squeezed. Ride-sharing fares shoot straight up. The cost of simply moving things from point A to point B becomes an absolute crisis for every single business operating on tight margins. And remember, Europe is deeply, deeply interconnected. It's like a giant puzzle. Supply chains are built on constant movement across borders, not national isolation. So a fuel shock in one European country definitely doesn't stay there. Trucks crossing borders carry that exact same cost pressure right along with them. Suddenly, the quiet humming background of continental transport, where literally millions of trucks cross European borders every single day, becomes very loud and very expensive. It drags down the entire region's economy simultaneously. Moving on to Section 2, the cost of everything. Let's walk through how this builds into what we call a delayed disaster. Step 1, fuel prices spike at the pump. Step 2, freight, shipping, and crucially, agricultural costs jump because tractors and farm equipment rely heavily on diesel. Step 3, the true impact arrives weeks or even months later. Food, retail, manufacturing, imported goods, they all get a massive price hike. Basically, even if you don't own a car, you are going to pay that fuel bill indirectly through the price of your bread, milk, and vegetables. There is no escaping it. All of this creates a sort of creeping emotional exhaustion. As the quote goes, it is not one dramatic blow, it is 1,000 smaller ones. You might not always connect the dots right away. You just feel that every single day, life gets a little more expensive. Every restaurant meal, every delivery fee, every packaged good slowly drains your wallet. And that sense of creeping pressure, that is exactly what makes a gas price crisis so incredibly taxing on the public psyche. Which brings us to Section 3. Unequal burdens and anger. And this brilliantly illustrates how, when the pressure builds, it doesn't build equally. On one hand, a wealthy urban driver might grumble about the pump prices, but they adapt, right? Maybe they just take the train more often. But on the other hand, a rural working-class family who absolutely relies on a car for work, school, and groceries is heavily squeezed. They feel completely isolated. What is a market nuisance for one group becomes a full-blown moral and political crisis for another. the harsh human reality of fuel inflation is that it hits the most vulnerable the absolute hardest. Naturally, frustration inevitably turns to anger, and people demand to know who is responsible. The public just starts firing off questions. Is it a breakdown in global supply? Are we being taxed too heavily? Is it market manipulation by energy giants? Is it just poor infrastructure planning? Or maybe geopolitical instability? The political mood becomes totally chaotic. People want relief, they want clarity, and they want control. And when they don't get those things instantly, trust in institutions begins to fracture, and it fractures fast. It creates this massive emotional gap where citizens feel like they're working harder but getting poorer. Think about it. You can reduce your electricity usage, you can turn down the heat, but for millions of people, transport cannot be eliminated. You still have to get to work. So when fuel gets this expensive, it literally feels like a tax on daily existence. And historically speaking, this is the exact combustible feeling that leads to protests, convoys, and demands for immediate government intervention. Let's look at our final section, testing Europe's resilience. The most visible change here is behavioral. Spontaneity basically dies. Ordinary movement becomes a luxury. People start bundling their errands, mapping out the most efficient routes just to save a few drops of gas. Commutes change, with a massive push toward remote work or carpooling if that's even possible. Holidays are canceled. Families even start rethinking car ownership entirely, asking if that second car is actually a financial necessity or just a massive burden. The entire continent begins to feel heavier, more deliberate, and so much more constrained. So the crucial point is that a fuel shock is, ultimately, a resilience shock. It is a profound test of a society's shared problem solving. It asks whether a continent can absorb incredible pressure without letting panic, inequality, and political division spiral completely out of control. It tests national governments, sure, but it also fundamentally tests Europe's collective energy security. Now, there is a duality to this crisis. In the painful present, we see slower economic growth, lower consumer confidence, and businesses operating defensively just to survive. But looking at the accelerated future, extreme pressure forces rapid innovation. High fuel costs can aggressively accelerate electric vehicle adoption, push companies to develop hyper-efficient logistics, and force governments to seriously upgrade public transit. Sometimes a crisis speeds up the change that was already long overdue. This brings some massive, long-term strategic debates right to the center of international forums. Governments are basically forced to ask the hard questions. Are our energy supplies diversified enough? Do we have adequate storage for the next crisis? Are there viable alternative transport methods? Is our infrastructure actually resilient? Energy independence is no longer just some abstract policy term discussed in boring committee meetings. It becomes a literal survival term for the economy. Europe has weathered severe price shocks before. It definitely has the institutions and the expertise. But the true test is twofold. Does adaptation happen fast enough? And does it happen fairly enough? Can the continent manage the transition toward efficiency and alternative energy without placing a crushing, punishing burden on the lowest income households and rural communities? Because at the end of the day, fairness is what keeps the entire system from breaking. Ultimately, a fuel crisis hits the very rhythm of life. It changes what people can afford and how secure they feel about tomorrow. To bring it all together, when gas prices rise again, the real cost is not only money. It is the pressure they put on the future. It really exposes the fragility of our everyday mobility. So if a sudden shock happened tomorrow, would your daily life break or would it adapt? If this explainer made you look differently at how deeply fuel affects our civilization, be sure to subscribe for more insights. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the systems that keep our world moving.